So this is the good segue, because one of our big places of growth and transition right now is this question of Firebird Spirit. So many churches are coming to us. Here's the energy and enthusiasm, approaching South and saying, how did you do this? We want you to walk with us and show us how to do it. And that's been the focus of a lot of prayer and discernment among the session for a long time now. And certainly Deb has been on the front lines of answering those calls, and along with Kevin, who physically picks up the phone. And this is such a big issue. It's not just what are the acts of faith. It's walking with churches that are grieving and fearful, and probably with some kernels of courage and hope, or they would be calling us divided. Yeah, there's divisions. So this is really a ministry, and it's a new one for South because it's not right here in Rochester. So we wanted to take a little time this morning for Deb to share with you some of the latest pieces of Firebird Spirit as we're talking about passing the mantle, because these are a different way of passing the mantle of the way of being church. We're not giving it up, we're just making an extra long one that we're all going to share together. But how do we do that and remain South? So Deb's going to talk to us about that. Thank you.
So it was about 3 years ago that our visioning team was talking about, well, where do we go and how do we share this? We were starting to get these invitations to go to the national conferences to talk and to do things for the presbytery, to give have conversation about how are we doing what we're doing. And I don't remember who it was on the visioning team who said it needs to be another act of faith. And kind of looked, I think it might have been Andy Pratt actually, and because I remember looking at Andy and saying, how is this an act of faith? And he said, well, what's our mission statement? And I said, to go out and train everyone you meet far and near in my way of life. And he said, exactly. And he said, you know, we think about it in terms of individuals and a community that we're supposed to do that with. He said, but I think that because of our connectional nature in the church, we are also supposed to be responsive to other people who have needs and are coming to us with a need to find out how to do this in ministry. And we all took a deep breath and said, okay, not too sure how we should go about doing this, but let's give it a try. So that was 3 years ago, and we looked at, I loved his name of Firebird Spirit, because he said, well, everything's related to our logo, which we call a Firebird logo. We've all seen it, with the wing on front. And he said, and this is the Firebird Spirit. He said, it's reminiscent of the phoenix rising from the ashes, which many of these groups are trying to do, and which we have done and are doing. He said, it's also the spirit of Pentecost and the church coming alive. And the more that group talked that day, the more we realized we were birthing something new, and we've been working ever since to figure out, what does that look like? How can we do that? It was around that same time that we took that idea to the session, and the session said, we need to start planning to have a second full-time minister on board so that you can be doing this as part of a plan towards some sort of financial sustainability. We didn't know how that was going to look. We just knew that somehow they were linked, and we still pray that they are. So I'm going to spend just probably about 10 minutes and explain to you what it is, where it is, how it works, what it's all about, this Firebird Spirit thing. As it is now, Firebird Spirit, sorry, I'm out of my thing here, there we go. There we go. Firebird Spirit, these are the things that we are being asked to do. And when I say asked, I mean we're talking Florida, Virginia this week was just in touch with us, Sacramento, of course Los Angeles, Princeton. We've had calls from south side of Chicago, the Utica Presbytery, New Jersey, Trenton, the Synod as a whole, which is 8 states in the Northeast. These are the things that we are being asked to offer: workshops and seminars, consulting services, what we call shadow shepherding, and our model for that is South Working with New Life, and how we did that over a 2 or 3 year period. Online peer group cohorts, offering guided support to the different churches. That will be, as I say, online. Resourcing for groups of churches and setting up regional offices. That's like what we were calling the BOP program. But we realized that through the work that we did, that we're not called to do BOP in the sense we were looking at it, where churches would pay us to do their office work. What we found out with South Working with New Life is that it can save people money by combining office staff and supply and reducing overhead for people, for churches. So now we're in a position to help regionally, help a group in New Jersey set up this kind of an arrangement, to work with a group in California, a group of churches there that want to set it up. So again, we're sort of consulting based on our experience. And it includes telecommunications and website assistance and management, restructuring, phone coverage, all the things that Kevin does and has done for us. But these are the things that we are being asked on a regular basis now to offer. These are some of the discussions that we've led. You can read the topics for yourselves. They're everything from the beginning of today's conversation, 21st century churches, to what's happening nationally, what are pitfalls and problems and delays, how do you handle those if you're selling your building, providing a reality check for some churches when we sit down with them and say, all right, let's look at your money, let's look at your membership, let's look at your ministry, community organizing around spiritual needs, missional ministry in an interfaith world. And the topic list just keeps expanding. So this is what we put up in front of people to learn how you can transform your church for the 21st century, Firebird Spirit. You'll notice it says Inc. and our address and our connection. We have an amazing team for this act of faith. People who are experts in their fields, marketing, business, high tech, transformational change. And so the Presbyterian attorney came to us. Well, actually, we went to her a year ago in the fall. Kevin and I sat down with Barbara James and we said, look, we're being asked to do this more and more. We need to know about the liability for South Church. We need to know about costs. Is there some way that we can protect the church in case there's ever an argument, a contract dispute or anything? She listened to us and she said, well, I'll tell you right now, you need to incorporate. You need to incorporate Firebird Spirit so that it is a separate legal entity just for that reason, to protect the liability of the church. You don't want somebody who might be upset when you're doing a workshop and they feel you have not fulfilled your contract to sue the church.
Yeah.
And we said, oh, yeah, we don't want that. So the session spent about 3 or 4 months talking about it, praying about it, listening to Barbara James about it, figuring out how to do this, where we could do this. We were finally able to, and they voted yes that we should do this at the June meeting, we should incorporate. And since then, we have hired an attorney who comes highly recommended, who does nothing but not-for-profit work. He specializes in housing and neighborhood and community development. So this kind of fits with our idea of church development. His name is Philip Borelli. And Phil has worked very closely with us. So where things stand now is that we have incorporated, we are a not-for-profit corporation in New York State. We are currently filling out the paperwork to become a 501c3 charity. We'll probably complete the paperwork, I would guess, in the next couple of weeks. So I would think that would be in place by the fall, which is exactly on target for what our timeline was when we first talked with the session about it. The challenge has been to figure out, well, okay, so what does Firebird Spirit do and how's it related to South Church? And who has authority over it? Because it's a corporation, it has its own board. We are writing into the bylaws that more than 50%, over half of the board must be members of the PCUSA in some way, either of a local church or of a presbytery. And so our opening board that we have, Karen Thomas is president of the board. She lives in Tucson, but she's a member of South. She's retired middle management at Kodak. Laura Bachman is the vice president of the corporation. I'm the secretary and also the executive director. Kevin is the treasurer because that's what he's doing. He's doing all of the money and data. And the other board members are Steve Longley, who is from Trenton and Princeton. Most of you have met Steve. He's the former marketing exec. Sonia Kennedy and Rachel McGuire, who's American Baptist. We'll be having our initial board meeting sometime probably towards the end of August. So the bottom line for South is, all right, so what does this mean to South? What does it mean to us financially? What does it mean to us organizationally? The best example I can give you for how Firebird Spirit will relate to South Church is to say these things. Firebird Spirit will remain an act of faith of South Presbyterian Church, even though it is a separate organization. We will have that link on an organizational structure so that there's a connection. That connection, let's see, what's the second one I want to say, wait a minute. Will remain an act of faith, but it will be its own legal entity. And it took me a while to figure out, well, what would that mean? And the example I've come up with is churches who have preschools. We know a lot of churches that have had preschools. The preschool becomes incorporated for liability reasons, but it's still recognized as part of the church. So Firebird Spirit is the way of, and it says in its charter that one of its purposes is to further the mission of South Presbyterian Church. So it's linked, even though it's technically a different legal entity. It is linked by virtue of its charter to South. And South does not have authority over it, but they're sort of in a partnership, if you will. We're looking at it now as saying that South has the acts of faith. Firebird Spirit is sharing the South model with the world. And that's why we're starting now here with two pastors. One who is focused on the local acts of faith, and the other who the session has asked me to spend 75% of my time, which is why I don't do more with the individual acts of faith, Laura does. That 75% of my time will be focused on Firebird Spirit. So we look ahead at the financial future. We can't keep going the way that we are going, and we know that we are living off the combined investments of South and New Life that are invested with the Presbyterian Foundation. We also know that we are called to do this work. And so one way to think about it is to look at South's budget and what are the big ticket items in the budget since we don't have a building. Where does most of the money go? Well, it goes to salaries. It goes to my salary and Laura's salary, Kevin's salary, Andy's salary. Those are your 4 salaried people. So is there some way to either take a couple of us and have us hired by Firebird Spirit and have Firebird Spirit support our salaries? Isn't that great? Or is there a way to have income to Firebird Spirit that would pay South Church for our time? We were leaning toward the latter at the beginning. We thought, okay, Firebird Spirit will be income producing for South Church. Everybody's saying to us, no, that's not going to work. Don't look at it that way. Look at it instead of taking your expenses away from South Church. So then we operated with that thought for about 6 months, 3 months. Now we've kind of come back around to the first model, and I'll tell you why. Karen Thomas said to me, we were talking about the need to get officer and trustee of directors insurance for a not-for-profit. And Karen said, you know, you've got to do this. I said, yeah, Kevin's working on that. She said, the other thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to renegotiate all of the contracts that South Church has for Firebird Spirit to have these contracts. And I'm thinking, oh, like copiers and all of that stuff. And then I went, and rent. And she said, oh yeah, that's a real thing, isn't it? And I went, well, wouldn't it make more sense since South has this 5-year lease now and we're only 1 year into it and we love where we are and we'd always planned on sharing the office space with Firebird Spirit. Wouldn't it make more sense for South to maintain the contract of Firebird Spirit than to pay South for office, for Kevin's time, for my time, and so on? So we've kind of come full circle. We're back around to looking at that model. So that raises the question then, well, what do we do? How is Firebird Spirit going to get money? We had put in the budget for this year, I think it was $3,000 income, very modest, just to kind of prime the pump, $3,000 income coming from Firebird Spirit things. We've already topped that. We're over 4,000 now for Firebird Spirit income. But we have to have big bucks. And in talking with both the board of Firebird Spirit and people out there, and I'll tell you about some of those people, we've come up with the idea that we really need about $150,000 for 2 years to operate so that we will not be drawing down from South's investments. That $150,000 would cover my salary, it would cover Kevin's salary, and some money to go towards the office costs, overhead expenses. I have to be honest with you, about 4 months ago, I thought to myself, $150,000, who is ever going to give us $150,000? Now I'm finding out that people are willing to have serious discussions with us about that. For instance, Laura, Kevin, Steve came up from Princeton, and so Laura, Kevin, and I met with Harold Delhagen, who is the head of the Synod of the Northeast, the 8 states in the Synod. And he's the Amy Fowler of the Northeast. And it was my second conversation with Harold. The first one had been about a month before, and I sat down with him at Benucci's, and I said, Harold, I need 3 things from you. And he smiled, he said, what? And I said, well, I need your Rolodex. And then we both laughed and said, does anybody have Rolodexes anymore? He said, well, you want my contacts. I said, no, I want your networks. He goes, oh. And he said, keep talking. I said, I want your money. And he said, how much? And I said, $500,000 over 2 years.
500,000?
500,000. I'm starting big. And he sat there and he didn't pass out. He didn't. He sat there and he said, I don't have that much, but I can get you a fair chunk. What do you need it for? And I told him. And I said, and the third is that we want to create a new funding stream at the Synod level to create a new position that we will pilot that's called a community chaplain. And I said, because we have ministries where people will never be able to afford to pay for their pastoral care. And we can't expect those ministries that we do have, those acts of faith where there are people of means, we can't expect them to be paying everything to support all 18 or 20 acts of faith. And he knew enough about us because he was really involved with us getting the $34,000 grant from the Synod a couple of years ago. He said, listen, I'm really excited about what South is doing. Talk to me about the chaplaincy program. I said, well, it would be, we're looking for $40,000 a year to help cover half the cost of Laura and the work that she's already doing and things that might grow out of that. He said, I need to meet Laura. This is why he came back a second time. I talked with him about Firebird Spirit's ideas of consulting and how we're being invited said, when I mentioned Los Angeles, he said, why are you going to the West Coast when we could keep you busy in the Northeast? And I said, because they're the ones that asked. So you want us working with the Northeast churches? You get them to call us. And he said, okay, here's where I think we can handle this. He said, yes, there can be some money, and he's talking 50 to 60,000, that could come to you directly, and then the rest can be money that we will pay churches and presbyteries in the Northeast to work with Firebird Spirit. So it will end up with you, but that way the presbyteries are each responsible for the money that gets assigned to them. I said, okay, so far. Then I said to him, here's what Paul Greer has written to us, about us, that we are, and he's from the Presbyterian Foundation, that South is one of two examples that the foundation is talking about all across the country as being viable for the future. Our model of ministry is one of two examples in the denomination. And he looked at me and he said, and he started to smile. I said, so if that's who we are to the denomination needs to be supporting us. That's the bottom line. And I said, because otherwise we're going to close up shop at the end of 2022 when we run out of money. He said, how much money will the foundation give you? And I said, well, we've been told that there's no money available, blah, blah, blah. And he looked at me and he said, well, you're friends with Paul? I said, yes. He said, I'm friends with Tom Taylor, who's the head of the foundation, Paul's boss. He said, and I just got Tom to work with a church in Astoria, Queens, and to provide money for them. He said, so we need to have a conversation. So Harold is setting up a symposium, a summit for 6 churches. South is one of them. In the fall at Stony Point. Present will be Tom Taylor, head of the foundation, and Diane Moffett, who's head of PMA, that's Presbyterian Mission Agency, that's Ray Jones's immediate boss. Ray sits second chair to her. And because they have some money, and they're the ones that sponsor 1001 and some other things. And he said, we need to have you sitting there so we can resolve this issue. We can figure out how to free the monies up for churches like you, because you're right. You are what the denomination is looking toward for its survival. And I said, no pressure here. and then I said, well, you know, Harold, it has to be flexible. It's gotta move fast, because you don't. And he said, I know we don't. And I said, so third option is Lilly Foundation. And they have the money. They pay for new innovations in ministry. The problem is they don't, and Amy Fowler said this to me Thursday, they don't like to pay small groups. And Harold, and I said, but most of their money comes through Duke now, doesn't it? Duke University. And he said, yes. And he said, and Amory, whose last name I can't remember, who is on the staff of the Synod, is our representative there and works with Duke with the Lilly money. And I said, and you would like Amory to go after money for South, wouldn't you? And he said, I would. So we're looking at options through the Synod, number one, that include Lilly Foundation, that include bringing the national church into this. I've turned around and had conversations with Ray Jones, because he's coming up in the fall. And I said to him, here's what's going on. Here's what Harold said. We need money from you guys. And he said, I don't even know what monies are available. He said, I've lost track of what the pots of money are, but I will check on things, and I will get back to you by the end of the summer. And I said, bonus. At the same time, we're getting Trenton, New Brunswick Presbytery, is talking with us about 3 different contracts, one of which would probably be a $20,000 or $25,000 contract for a year to help them with what they're doing. So I don't know exactly what's happening, any more than we knew when we sold the building and didn't know where we were going to worship. I know that there is stuff out there that's happening. I know that God's in charge, whether you like it or not, Jane. And that there are 3 things that are really in our favor. One is that we are a new model. The second is that we are successful. People are really impressed with the fact that over 1,700 different people were involved in our Acts of Faith last year. And it was like 13,000 contact points. The big thing is that we are the only model right now for transitioning from bricks and mortar churches into more missional churches. And let's face it, most of the churches that are struggling and on the brink of closing are those who are bricks and mortar churches. When Randy Lovejoy was here, he told us that out of the 26 churches in San Fernando Presbytery, 17 or 18 of them are in transition and they close. Think of that. In this presbytery, we're much better off. It's only a quarter of our churches are in transition right now. But still. So this is everywhere. And what we just have to do is believe that God is doing something, which we feel God is doing. We can feel that happening. And move forward. It's like Firebird Spirit is Elisha to South Church's Elijah. And it's not that South is getting ready to fly off into the great beyond. It's that we are earlier in the story when the two of them are working together and sort of sharing a mantle. Yeah, question? No, question?
We have four things in our favor, and Deb Swift is number 4. Led by God. You are the person who has worked so hard. We still exist because of your efforts, led by God. You are number 4 in that list. You might be number 1.
I think God's number 1. I think God's amazing, but I think God is number 1. I think our session has been consistently brave and consistently called to not give up, to not just say, okay, well, we're just a little church, we're just going to close and that's it. But to be open to the fact that we are, we're not seeking these people out. I couldn't believe it when I walked in the other day and I hear Kevin on the phone and he says, well, we're out of books right now. We've had to place another order for the 3rd edition because we've sold out. And then I hear silence. And where are you? Oh, what part of Virginia? How did you hear about the book? Oh, from a friend. Uh-huh. And what's your church? Oh, Disciples of Christ. So it's moving beyond the Presbyterians. It's moving into other denominations. And it's sort of doing its own thing, which is not unlike how all of our acts of faith got started, that there's something happening, and we're just trying to be faithful and pay attention. Pat?
You know, as I stand here and listening to all of it, I think about the history and traditions of our very conservative Rochester, which if you look at it historically, it's been very innovative.
Yeah.
And that's the energy that is feeding all of this.
I think so, and Rochester has always, you're right, been a hotbed of spiritual development nationally. So maybe this is part of it. I do believe that we are experiencing the birth of the next Renaissance Reformation of the church. You know, many of us have read books and articles about that. I do think that that's true. I agree, those of you who are in the leadership development, the leadership retreat, when Rachel spoke about eschatological communities, you know, what a great term. But she was saying that throughout church history, it's always been the small churches that have been the yeast, that have really been the mustard seeds, where the ideas have grown and taken over. And she said, and when South's time is done, God will find another eschatological community. But I don't think God's done with us yet. So as we begin to separate, Laura and Kevin and I regularly will talk about budget and looking ahead. And we begin to separate out, you know, what are acts of faith that can stand on their own that don't require any money? What are acts of faith that require money and can support themselves? What are the acts of faith that will never be able to support themselves but require some money? And that's where I know she mentioned earlier that we're talking, just beginning to have quiet conversations with milers and with Mount Hope World Singers. We don't want to stand in their way of growing and developing, because they are. And we don't have the resources to help them with that. So one option for them would be either find another group that they could fall under, and we would bless that if they could help them, or to become independent like Firebird Spirit is, becoming its own not-for-profit, its own corporation that could stay linked, perhaps, to South Church in the same way that Firebird Spirit is, but that would have its own income, its own board, its own legal entity. So all of these things, it would be so much easier, especially at my time in life, if we just lay it out and say, okay, here's step number one, and then there's the next thing we'll do. And that is not the way that it has worked for either one of our congregations in the last 11 years that I've been here. And it's not the way that this is unfolding either. This is a very spiral journey that's organic and that's unfolding as we go. And I think it's all part of the mantle. What is the mantle of responsibility that we have as part of the connectional PCUSA system? And as followers of Jesus Christ, what is our responsibility? And I thank you. I don't mean to just bowl over that. I'm ready for vacation. I start my vacation after worship tomorrow. And I'm ready for the next sort of month to recuperate. It has been and is a challenge, and I do feel the weight of the burden of the financial sustainability of this congregation. I feel it every day. But increasingly, there are so many bright lights that are starting to pop up. Conversation I had Friday with someone Steve set me up with at Princeton Theological Seminary, who teaches a course in entrepreneurship in the church. She's well acquainted now with what we're doing and with Firebird Spirit. She would like us to come and be a part of her class presentation at the seminary so that we can get the word out, and people who are then starting out in ministry will have another option open to them. I don't know where God's leading this. I haven't a clue. I do know that I think about retirement. I'm 65. I have children in college. I probably don't want to retire and can't retire for another 3 to 5 years. But I would like to be able to sort of taper down what I'm doing, so maybe I'm not full-time. I'm really aware of the burden that my salary places on South Church. I live with that too every day, and I'm humbled and grateful and try always to give you my best, But we have someone that if the way be clear, if this is where she feels called, if this is where God is leading us and our church, we have a path forward to continue being the test kitchen and have this other group be the ones who can share the model. So, other questions? There's probably a lot I can't answer right now, but at least the session really wanted you to know what they've been doing, what they've been listening to, struggling with, saying yes to. We know it's making the money run out sooner. Karen is our financial forecaster. She estimates that if nothing changes, and I stress that things are already changing, if nothing changes, by the end of 2022, we will be left with $50,000 in our investments. Could the church continue with that? Yes, it could. We would have to drastically change what we're doing, but all of our acts of faith could continue. We would have to consider, I would move into retirement. We would have to find money to support a pastor and to figure out what we want to do with Andy, and we'd lose Kevin. So, those are the options as we see them right now, but those options change. Every time we hear about, oh, thus and such a church is looking to spend $50,000 on some sort of education program. Oh, really? Yeah, well, I think Firebird Spirit is that, don't you? Absolutely. So, we have these possibilities, these points of light. And I think the best we can do is just pray about it and keep putting one foot in front of the other.
You know, I hope that we can continue because we got a lot of irons in the fire here. And I still think that it's very exciting. And when the excitement goes away, things fail.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to happen.
I don't think that's going to happen, Gordon. I think even if we were to totally bomb out with Firebird Spirit and just be reduced, and I don't say that in a pejorative way, even have to redefine ourselves as a smaller entity, it still will be a viable force in the Presbyterian Church and certainly in the lives of all of the people that we touch. I truly don't see our acts of faith going away. I think that's one of the genius things about this model that you've created is that they are self-sustaining in developing their own leadership. And that's what we're working toward, that every act of faith would not be pastor dependent. So, I think the genius is in the plan. It's figuring out how to move into the next 10 years and where are the mantles of responsibility and how do we deal with it moving forward?
Well, don't lose track of any of these key people that we've got.
No, we're hanging on to them like glue.
We've got a lot of great people there.
Yeah.
And I think of Steve and the other folks. This is very exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
This is really something.
It's
And
life-altering.
When people are asking about this from one coast to the next, boy, you cannot stop this.
Yeah.
This is very important.
I just want us to have enough breathing room so that we can enjoy how it's traveling from coast to coast. And I think the next 2 years, and I said this at the annual meeting, the next 2 years will be pivotal in the life of this church. Because this is where we're trying to get money to support us, so we don't have to take any money from investments for those 2 years. That would build up a nice little cushion, God willing. We'll see.
Let's keep on the path.
Okay. So, it's time for some lunch here. You want to give instructions about the lunch, and then when you come back, Laura and I will come around and do your drinks for you. We're going to just do a buffet line, I think, out in the kitchen. And during your lunch, though, I'm going to show you some videos and talk about the website.